Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Row on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Happy to have you along with us for another edition of Press Row. Our featured guest this evening, anytime you get the two of us together, chances are there is no show time frame that can contain us, and thus a two-part conversation with Sean Sweeney, sports reporter, Sentinel Enterprise, and owner-operator of the Bay State Soccer Sentinel. That's baystatesoccersentinel.com. Tonight, Sean Sweeney and I discuss this COVID-19 pandemic shutdown for local athletics and what it means for the future. And our second part of our conversation will come your way later on this week. But first, part one of my conversation with Sean Sweeney of the Sentinel Enterprise and Bay State Soccer Sentinel here on Press Row. We were going to have, an ongoing series here on Press Row for a state of athletics in Massachusetts, particularly a state of high school athletics in Massachusetts. You are absolutely one of those voices in central Massachusetts that we have to get on and discuss the myriad of things that have been going on beyond just a COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Todd, given the state of things, not just in Fitchburg, Leominster, Central Mass, the Commonwealth as a whole. It's been a long time since I've seen you. I miss you guys.
Back at you.
But yeah, good to be here, and hopefully the next hour is going to breeze by. I think it's going to be a very entertaining hour.
It is one of those what I always say cannot be missed hours, hopefully, here on Rivalry Family Media Show. And we'll talk about first kind of what I think is on everybody's mind because this COVID-19 pandemic is kind of front of mind right now. And that, of course, is a return to athletics, the return to normalcy. Phrases like new normal. There are more memes out there talking about new normal and hating the phrase new normal at this point in time. But I think everyone wants to know, when are we going to return to athletics? What are they going to look like, when we do return to them. And everyone, of course, is hopeful that will come with a return to school in the late August, September timeframe of calendar year 2020 to begin a 2020-2021 school year. And yesterday, kind of in a step in that general direction, the National Federation of High School Sports, which is kind of the broadest governing body that oversees just about all of high school athletics, or at least creates policies to help guide state associations like the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association for how to govern high school athletics, put out a 16-page set of guidelines, and they were really trying to, again, give these state associations some consideration for what could you possibly do, what do things need to look like, what information should you be taking in. It was filled with a lot of questions that the state association should be able to answer before they move forward. But some of the things that I thought really stood out when we think about, what a return to athletics might look like. One of them in particular, not a surprise, cloth face coverings figured prominently in those recommendations in cases where they were practical. Sports like swimming, it noted right off the bat, it's impractical to consider wearing a cloth face covering and to consider that would do anything to help, prevent a spread of any form of disease. But where practical, players, coaches, fans, officials, I think at least in some ways, I thought this might be coming, but in some ways in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how a cloth face covering makes football or basketball any more practical with a disease you can't see.
Right. I and obviously I'll tell you right up front with you. When we talked in the pre-show, it was the first time I've heard about the guidelines. To be completely honest with you, but I've been thinking about how are we going to come back to the normalcy? How are we going to have high school sports in the fall if that happens? We don't know yet. It's only the middle of May, tail end of May. That's still 3 months down the road. It's a long way away. So, how do we get back to it? I think that a lot of these state associations should obviously look to the National Federation for guidance, but also look at what the pros are doing. Major League Soccer right now, of course, I'm going to go right to them first. given what I do outside of high school sports, they have limited voluntary training sessions to 4 players at a time on one soccer pitch. So that's 4 out of 30 that are allowed to work at one time. They have to be social distance in the parking lot as well. Once they enter the facility, they need to have a temperature check. Same going away from the facility. So we want to do this smart. We want to do it safe. And how do you address what happens if a number of players end up getting sick? I know that in a lot of these schools, you don't have a lot of people that can, that are, I don't think I want to necessarily say aren't qualified to take a temperature. I think everyone can. But, how do you do it for, like in the fall, you have football, you have 2 soccers, you have cross country, and you got field hockey and boys volleyball or girls volleyball indoors. So that's a lot of student athletes that you have to test every day, once a day or twice a day, whatever. And I think you might even have to go a little bit further and make sure you're checking on their mental health every day. And, it's what I call looking after the full athlete, and not just, have you eaten or, have you slept? How are you feeling? How are you adjusting to this new normal? And I think that's going to be very important moving forward. And I know that you've talked about games during the Spanish flu where you're wearing a cloth face mask. I have one that's handmade by my mother-in-law. But what's going to happen if we can't start on time?
And how will that play out? You asked another one of the key questions, and this was a multitude of questions that came out of these guidelines that they pointed to that state associations needed to be able to answer before beginning athletics. And that was, what does happen if a whole team or a whole section of a state needs to be quarantined and allow you to then proceed with whatever it is you're going to do? Are you going to, in this state, we have another year before you get into those statewide tournaments that we'll talk about. So are you going to stop after district play, and stop an entire district, allow the other districts to proceed, and then just stop, in that scenario? Plus, obviously, the larger when the mixing and matching and the state crossovers begin, you're going to be bringing people from potentially one part of the state, which could pop up as a hotspot, to another location and create another potential hotspot in a location that maybe wasn't, as populous. So it really does, kind of create this question, as I've been wrestling with, and I know I could hear you wrestling with it as well, is can sports resume the way we all know them? Whether they are, at the professional level, it'll likely be done for financial reasons. At the collegiate level, considering what they're talking about, at least at Division I, a lot of the money that comes from television and comes from, the different sponsorship deals that those Division I universities have. The existence of football and men's basketball and women's basketball allow the existence of crew and, women's softball and a number of other sports that maybe perhaps don't have the financial benefits that these other larger sports do. So without the larger sports, there will be no trickle down to the smaller sports to exist. So in that sense, I think in college athletics, there's going to be a financial determining factor that will push them forward at some point in time when it's closer to safe. But at the high school level, you don't have that push. You don't have a financial push. You're not going to get any better or worse off, in your financial standpoint, whether you're the MIAA or whether you are, your local, school district, by not offering athletics. So the question is this at this time, without either herd immunity really being a thing or some form of a large form vaccination and testing program, are athletics at the high school level even a possibility to consider?
I don't even think that it's even time to decide that. I think we have to be closer to August in order to really make that determination. I know a lot of the fall schedules are already set, and there are coaches that are getting ready to go through their summer workouts, and I know that the Air Shirley cross country team, they're continuing to work out through this. Their workouts are being posted to Google Classroom, and I know Charlie Raff at Fitchburg for football is posting in the workouts. This is what you got to do on Google Hangouts and on Google Classroom. But when it comes down to it, it's got to be done safely, if at all. And let me raise this question. I know you were talking about the financial aspects. What happens to budgets if you don't have that gate? And yes, high school football and high school athletic departments are driven in part by your football gate, especially your Thanksgiving gate, regardless if it's a meaningful game, regardless if it is Fitchburg Leominster or Blackstone Valley Tech against Nipmuc. It doesn't really matter what game it is. That is part of your budget for the entire school year and for a little bit of the next. So if you are a small school in anywhere in Massachusetts, you need to have high school athletics. You need to have high school football, because that gate, except in the Berkshires where they don't play high school football on Thanksgiving, you need that gate. That's imperative. So what happens, especially Todd, given that officials starting, I believe, next year are going to get a 3% raise? Where's that money going to come from? Never mind finding the money for the ferry during the statewide tournament. You're going to need that money to pay officials now. So what happens? I mean, are you going to go with your hat in your hands in front of the school committee and say, we need a little bit more money? So it's something that I'm struggling with in terms of, do we do it fairly, and what happens, or safely, I should say, and what happens if there's a problem with your budget because of this, because you're not having high school athletics in the fall or even in the winter, if that is how this comes down to it.
It certainly is going to leave some folks to try to rectify those possibilities of one option versus another. And this is where certainly choices are going to play into this. And with school departments already considering, to be in a financially, kind of tenuous place, because they're expecting cuts to come from their cities and towns, because obviously potentially your tax base with a close to 30% national unemployment rate at this point in time, and only growing to this point, is going to affect obviously people's ability to pay into the tax, coffers, which could then obviously trickle down to, basic services when you get into police, fire, public education, and on down through the line. So it does push athletics from a standpoint of public education that much farther down the priority standpoint. But you do make another interesting point, and of course, timing in life is everything. Those 3% increases to those officials, I can say only as an official, are long overdue. Massachusetts has been behind the 8 ball in getting those when you compare them to other New England states. When you look at it more nationally, even, Massachusetts is maybe middle to bottom, but when you look at it just within the New England states, not even close to its touching counterparts and the nearby neighbors as well. So certainly a piece of it that has to play into it at some point in time as well.
And another thing about this is, if you can't make up that through your school committee or your town, you're obviously going to go to the families and say, hey, you've got to pay an additional X as your user fee. And I can tell you that I think the user fees are pretty astronomical as they are. And I know in some communities you can get away with, the waiver dependent on your income, but you might not be able to give a waiver at some point. Now, I don't know that for sure, but you gotta, when it comes down to it, if you're an AD and you're looking at the bottom line, and a lot of these schools do treat athletics as a business, because you get so much money in your coffers from a Thanksgiving game or a rivalry basketball game, and you've seen it. These gyms for basketball, when you're playing your rival and you're playing your varsity teams back to back, that's making a lot of noise in the building, a lot of extra work for your janitors, but you're also making some serious bank in order to help your budget.
And it's going to be something that is likely going to be sorely needed. And of course, just that normal aspect, right? Not just students returning to their everyday academics, in person, the way that they have grown up with athletics, academics, but athletically as well. You pointed to the need for that component of mental health, and in part, I think it is a release that a lot of students need. That student athlete component, they do go hand in hand, as for a lot of athletes, being a student is the way to get to your athletic day, or being an athlete is the way to get through your academic day, or vice versa. They do go hand in hand. And in order for us to really establish something closer to the normal that we've known for years and years, they both have to return to some form of their normal modus operandi.
At some point, it has to return. I don't know when. I don't have a crystal ball. And if I did, my mortgage would have already been paid off by now. But it's going to come back. The question is when. Can it be done safely? And, you got to ask the question of what happens if you come back and someone is sick, do you automatically take off the next 2 weeks? I remember reading about the Fitchburg Board of Health in 1918 when the Spanish flu was going on. The Red Raiders didn't get onto Crocker Field for football until about a month into the season. So, I mean, that's something that we can look to as a possibility. Do we know for sure? Probably not. It's such a fluid situation. It's so up in the air with what is going on right now. I don't know. The fact that the state American Legion board cut off American Legion 4 weeks before the season was to start. I was hoping that they'd try to give it a little bit more time for those kids who just have already lost their spring season. We're coming up on Memorial Day. Those games would have started probably next week, or the week after, or the week after that, depending on what your high school team, your base teams were doing in the tournament. Obviously, that's not happening. But it's so fluid, so up in the air that it's just wise right now to shut things down until we know exactly what's going on.
I know one of the ideas that's been floated out there nationally, and Leominster High School principal Steve Dubzinski called my attention to it, has been this idea of lose the rest of this calendar year, okay, assuming that you don't play another sporting event in calendar year 2020, but you are able to begin come January 2021. And so this idea is kind of this like 2-month chunk, so January and February would be your basketball seasons or your winter sports season. And then, March and April would be your football season, or what would have been your fall season, now moved to the early part of spring. And then May, June would be your traditional spring season for your bat ball sports and your lacrosses and other things. I thought it was an interesting creative idea that does get everything in within the 2020-2021 school year, but things are going to look an awful lot different than people are used to.
That's actually an absolutely brilliant idea, and I'll tell you, I have absolutely no problem in saying, no fall sports if necessary, or during the traditional time. I know a lot of people out there are probably going to say, "You're an idiot, Sweeney. We got to have Thanksgiving football." But no, we don't. But I think that idea is actually pretty good. I've actually spoken with some coaches in the last couple of weeks, outside of things that are going on here. Oh, Spooky's going to say hi. Hi, Spooky. That are wondering or thinking, they're going with the thought process that there's going to be no fall sports. Some are even going with the thought that there might not be any winter sports. And of course, that is so far down the road, we don't even want to think about that. But you know what? Starting in January 1st, January 2nd, whatever, that first week in January is, that's actually a pretty brilliant idea. And I'll have to tip the cap to Dubba, because that I actually like that idea. 2 months, make it condensed of a winter season. You don't even have to play, 16 games. Play your 10, play your 12 or whatnot in that amount of time. Have a very brief playoff, then get started on football, soccer, whatever, field hockey, and in the cold of March and April. I don't know about that. But then you have baseball in May and June. I'm all for that. I don't like to freeze my butt off for 2.5 hours covering baseball in April. So I'm for that. That's great. I like that idea.
I certainly was a fan of the concept as well, and of course I've said this before, and even within this year, it would require an act of the state legislature. But if you could get a little bit of breathing room to be able to slide into July, get past that June 30th budget deadline, you could release a little bit of the pressure on having to play some of those outdoor sports in the coldest parts of March, and shift it by a couple of weeks and push everything a little bit into the warmer weather. But that is all to be seen over the next handful of months. The only thing we do know is we do hope to see some form of athletics coming in the very, very near future, to say the least. When athletics do resume, it was intended to be, based on some of the action that we have been seeing, and action that has been taken by the MIAA, that it would be a year to prepare and a year to see how some of these new components of Sean Sweeney's favorite concept ever released by the MIAA. You'll see that this is quite a bit of sarcasm in a matter of moments.
So much sarcasm. So much sarcasm.
The statewide playoff concept that has been voted into place would not have begun with the 2020-2021 school year. However, prior to that determination, a Max Preps ranking system, which we'll get into as well, was to start being put into place, while also working within the current playoff format. And then we'd be able to also track what a future statewide tournament would look like, targeted to begin for 2020, 2022, 2021, 2022, excuse me, which is where, yeah, which is where ultimately we're heading with this concept. So, Sean, you had some great tweets, and I love finding concepts on Twitter. When this statewide tournament was voted on and announced, this was the reaction. You can follow Sean Sweeney, as it says right there on your screen, at Mr. Sean Sweeney, at Mr. Sean, missing the middle initial, Sean. What is it? M, that's it. Mr. Sean M. Sweeney. You can
There's
find
so many Sean Sweeneys and only one sports writer. Couldn't they figure that out?
There's another Todd Robbins out there too. It's a sideshow act. The guy swallows swords and breathes fire. It's hard to have that when you share names. It's hard to beat. But here's the tweet. Got right off there up at Twitter. From Sean Sweeney, quote: "My love, my affinity for local high school sports died, all capital letters, last Friday. Every AD effectively took 6 decades of history off their walls, threw it in a dumpster, and set fire to it. Once again, the AD's dancing to the tune the MIAA sets, not the other way around, as it should be." Sean, what we said prior in our preparation for this, you would be on the range in the absolutely not category of where we are. And I think that speaks to it. Why such a strong reaction?
You know me, Todd. You've known me for 25 years, and you know that I love the history of local high school sports. I love Fitchburg Leominster. I love St. Bernard's versus Lunenburg. I love Lunenburg against Oakmont, North Middlesex, that secondary rivalry for both Fitchburg and Leominster in the 90s, way back when, through the mists of time. And I think my anger has ebbed quite a little bit, given that I went through a move from Bolton to Fitchburg, and I've been very busy turning this farmhouse around a little bit at my nice new office. Very cute. But I kind of questioned the blue. I questioned the blue a little bit, but that's all right. and obviously with what else is going on in my life. So my anger with that is ebbed. Basically, my whole problem with this whole thing that I've really been thinking about over the last few weeks is that, oh, I got a dust in this room. The big problem that I have with this whole thing is that 74 athletic directors did not take part in this vote, ADs or principals. And to me, those ADs and principals were basically saying to the MIAA, this wasn't good enough for them. And there's a lot of other rule changes that are going on, and I know we're going to be breaching them. In the whole thing with the pitch counts in baseball, that gets onto the federation level. We've had the new federation rules for high school football. High school hockey has been switched with penalty times from 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. That's all to get a seat at the federation table. And I'm wondering, I'm going to raise this point, is this part and parcel of the MIAA getting, or in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, getting that seat at the federation table? So, because no one has really said this, and this is where that's where this is going. So they haven't said that. They haven't come out and said that. But also, what upsets me is that if this is supposed to be this big monumental change, why did the MIAA have this whole thing tucked away on the Tournament Management Committee subpage on the MIAA website? If this was such a thing that was so huge, monumental, a massive change over what we've had in Central Mass for the last 6-7 decades, this should have been on the front page, on the homepage of the MIAA. You got tournament cancellations on the front page. That's important because you got to make sure that the fans know that they don't have to spend their money with the MIAA that day. You have all of the tournament pairings on the homepage. You have all kinds of other links. You can't put this on the homepage. That reeks of a lack of transparency on the part of the MIAA. So there's that. Like, let me do a little bit of a tangent for you, Todd. You and Kate, you go out to dinner to the Monument Grill or to Lucas American Grill, or you go to Slattery's, you go to Donnelly's, you order a steak, or you order a chicken dish, you order fish, or you order pasta. You're going to get a salad. And I know Mike LeClaire is watching this, and he's saying that, a salad is a promissory note that food will soon arrive. You get that with a baked potato or some mashed potatoes, some rice pilaf, or and a nice vegetable, and they put it to you. They serve it on a nice china plate. It's all about the presentation. So you know what the MIAA did, and this might be a really crazy analogy, that this state playoff might be the greatest thing in the world. It may taste great. It may look great at first, but you want to know what they did? Instead of put it on a china plate, they took a garbage can lid, they turned it over, and they put that meal on top of it, and they served it to us like that. It's all about the presentation, and I think the MIAA absolutely failed in presenting this to everyone. I think they really rushed it. I think they put the cart before the horse, because there was at that time no plan, and I know that they're starting to come up with these plans for the next cycle. I've noticed Jim Clark and Danny Ventura have been tweeting about this over the last couple of weeks. We had the football committee last week. Baseball was today. Basketball was a couple days ago too. So you know what? Until we have a real plan, I think that I'm not on board with it. I will eventually be on board with it. Unlike the whole crap in Central Mass with basketball having teams in Eastern Mass coming to Central, and you and I have talked, we hate that. It's absolutely abysmal. But now you're going to be going, Fitchburg is going to be, if they get to the tournament, they're going to be making trips to Amesbury and Nauset, North Adams, Pittsfield. I'm just against it because it also takes money out of my pocket, especially if these teams are going to drive a ways for these games. So what are they going to, is the newspaper going to pay me to drive to Amesbury? Are they going to pay me to drive to Nauset? Probably not, given the budget situation in newspapers these days.
It certainly does lead to some challenges in coverage for sure. But I think the point you just made is probably the reason why I jumped on board with this, because the alternative, what was basically presented as, here's option A, here's option B. Option A was, let's try this new concept where maybe you could have some energy involved. Everybody's got to, deal with this. So, a team like Amesbury might have to go to North Adams or whatever the example might be. Marshfield may have to haul it out to Lee, whatever those examples size-wise may match up. But that was at least everybody bearing a little bit of that travel burden versus the alternative, plan B. If you didn't want to choose the statewide tournament, it was, okay, you could keep your sectional tournaments, but we're going to do more of that shifting. And there was going to be more East coming to Central, more Central going to West, and the chances of appealing your way out of Leominster, Fitchburg, Gardner, and everyone else being sent west was fairly limited. And after experiencing Leominster and Shepherd Hill being two of the lone schools that got shipped into that Western Mass basketball mess, I just couldn't condone it. So to me, it was not really a choice. It was, all right, I'll take my chances where at least everyone gets to share some of this travel burden. And maybe we can generate some excitement and energy with the idea of getting the best 32 teams or the best 16 teams in every sport into a tournament. And maybe that will generate some excitement somewhere along the way. Plus you get, home games at locations. There was something about that versus, say somebody like Athol or Lee or, North Adams you've referenced, likely getting shipped to the Albany bracket because that was, where were they going to go? We could only slide so many teams somewhere. So at some point it had to stop. I couldn't condone more shifting. So to me, the option that made most logical sense was, hey, let's go with this statewide tournament and see where the chips fall.
It seems like this statewide tournament was the lesser of two evils to a point, but there's still so many questions to be asked and answered, especially when it comes to the budget. If you are a team that is going to be good, yeah, you might have a couple of home games, but then you're going to go to another place because we don't know how this Max Preps ranking system is going to work out. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit. I haven't done enough research on it, but I have my feelings about that as well. But if you're going to be on a bus a couple times a weekend, you're going to be racking up some serious budgetary dollars, which, if I'm a taxpayer, and I am, if I'm seeing that on my local high school, I'm going to start asking some questions about, why was this brought up? Why do we have to do this? Why was this shoved down our throats when in reality, the sectional tournament setup really was not broken until basketball shifted teams west? And I do not like that. From Eastern Mass to Central and Central to West, I hate it. I hate that Quabbin has to go out to Taconic or to Pittsfield and get screwed by the Western Mass refs in basketball. I hate that Tantascwa had to go. I hate that Leominster had to go and get screwed. Yes, a Fitchburg grad defending Leominster. Yeah, we're going to cross the streams here. And that's because of course, the respect that I have for the Leominster program, in how that whole snafu with the bonus point with the Walker system came to be. And I was very, very happy for Leominster that they got that bonus point that next year, but then they appealed back to Central Mass, and that So that was about a year or two experience for Leominster. But yeah, I think that option C should have been put involved, which is put the tournaments back to where they were pre-2013, because they were not broken. They weren't. And referencing my tweet from 2.5 months ago, the ADs should have said, you know what, neither of those options were good. Go back and give us something else. And that's the whole thing. That's what ticks me off, is that none of them said, you know what, this is not good enough. Give me something else. Put something else on the ballot paper, like say, okay, this needs more study. How about that? I think it needed more study because, like I said, the presentation of it was not good. It was disgusting. I'm not going to eat this meal. I'm sorry. No, take this back. I want this on a plate. It's not, it just does not work for me. I can remember a whole thing from 2007 when I was the sports editor down in Southbridge, the Southbridge News. And one of the stories that I covered in that fall winter area was a whole thing about Nipmuc Regional, the school in Upton, the regional school Mendon Upton.
Alma mater of one and only Bill Thomas.
Wow, that you're dropping knowledge right there, my friend. Dropping some serious knowledge.
Hey, if we're gonna name check Nipmuc, we gotta name check Bill Thomas.
That's completely fair, and I love Billy. The thing was that they wanted to leave the Dual Valley Conference, and they wanted to go to the Southern Worcester County League. At the time, the DVC was a lot, and in a way it still is. There's a lot of small schools. I mean, the smallest school was in that whole thing was North Brookfield. They've now gone to the WCAC, the Worcester County Athletic Conference, and there's still the same schools. Whitensville Christian, there's Sutton, Douglas, and Blackstone Millville. A lot of small schools, and they were double, triple, quadruple the size of some of these schools. So they wanted to go to the SWICL, the Southern Worcester County League, a league that I actually really enjoyed covering when I was down in Southbridge, because you had the Shepherd Hill, you had Tantascwa, Southbridge, and Bartlett, and Northbridge, schools with a great athletic tradition. And of course, I appreciated that coming from up here with Fitchburg and Leominster and Lunenburg, Oakmont, St. Bernard's, North Middlesex, and name a school, and I can tell you about their athletic history. And a lot of the ADs liked, for most part, liked that idea, with the exception of maybe a Southbridge or a Quabog. These smaller schools in the SWICL that would just be getting trounced by another big school. And I remember one quote from that whole thing is that, ADs will look at that small picture, the athletic picture, but principals will take a look at a larger view of it and take a lot of things into an account. And I might have an ego for saying this, but I don't think that a lot of people took into account the media coverage and how it would be affected by a state tournament. First of all, I know that there are some newspapers whose budgets have been cut significantly. I also know that there are some newspapers who only have really one reporter in the building, and they are going everywhere, and then dealing with a very early deadline. And these same reporters, for the last 7 years of the basketball expansion, had to go to Pittsfield or Lee or Monument Mountain, wherever the hell that is, and they've ended up having to file their stories at a hick McDonald's with no power outlets, and that sucks. making that 2-hour trip out beyond the Quabbin. But now you're gonna be seeing that here on a Tuesday through Sunday, a weekend, like an NCAA tournament type of setup. And that might be okay. I think it would be great, obviously, for the student athletes, and of course it should be about them. But the thing about that Tuesday to Sunday thing is that the MIAA had said, oh, this to encourage more family time. You're going to be on a bus for half the frickin' day on a Saturday or a Sunday? How are you going to encourage family time? Are you kidding me? Don't sell me this crap about encouraging family time and then making them go halfway across the damn state from Lee to Nauset. Are you kidding me? This is BS. That's not going to encourage family time. It's not. Don't give me this crap. Don't give me that crap. It's not. And going back to the media, what are we going to do for stories on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday when we know or have known over the last few years that on a Monday, I've got D2 girls or D2 boys or D3 or whatever. And in our neighborhood with so many good teams, yeah, we're going to have games in those semifinals. So you're taking that kind of away from us. And, I know that there's this whole talk about reinventing or reimagining what a Central Mass champion would be. We haven't heard that plan yet. Until I hear this plan, I am firmly in the negative.
The concepts that I do like from this proposal, aside from not having more teams from the East shift into Central, we may as well all just be in one big pile. What you're pointing to, that conference tournament-esque idea, but I think it's going to need to include something like an AQ, like you have in the NCAA. That's an automatic qualifier. You're going to need some benefit. What's my reason for reducing my regular season from 20 to 18 or to 17 to then play in this other tournament that you're going to develop in Central Mass? I better get something for it. And so to me, I think it's an automatic qualification. That's what you would be playing for. You win the Central Mass Championship, you are the automatic qualifier, and then everybody else is going to hope their resume is good enough to be in the at-large or whatever the case may be, or that they make the top 32, or however that may ultimately play out. I think that's going to be considered part of this. I think you also have to consider what you're pointing to, which is those wraparound weekends. I think those are really, if you're going to do this and you're going to send, Team X from Eastern Mass all the way to somewhere in, Team Y in Western Mass, or even a Central Mass team to the North Shore on a Friday or what have you, you're going to have to play those games later. They're going to have to be for outdoor games played under the lights. And more aptly, they're going to have to be played on the weekends, which means you're going to need more flexibility, which may mean ultimately that when we do return to a more normal life and a more normal schedule, that the MIAA needs to take a step that they've needed to for a long, long time. And that is, we need to push the spring season further into June so that you can push the winter season further into March and then push the fall season further into December in order to create, more room, and or, by the way, with, that fall season, pull it into August a little bit in order to ultimately be able to accommodate, this idea and to do it right. Whatever the case may be, I can live with, and I think you'd be able to ultimately live with as well. If you're going to do it right, if you're going to make it exciting, if it's going to be something that people are going to want to engage in, and that is a great experience for the student athlete, if all that comes to fruition, then I don't think people will ultimately have a complaint about it. But to pretend that you can do it within the guidelines of, we'll use football, keeping the Thanksgiving Day games while you do it, play a 16-team statewide bracket across a number of divisions, still get it all done in time to have access to Gillette Stadium on the first Saturday of December, or the first Friday and Saturday of December. Those are pretty tight guidelines to work with without expanding your calendar of options somewhere along the way. And then the same thing as you kind of peel around into the other half of the year, you need more room to be able to do this right, which means you're going to need to add a couple of weeks into each season if you're really going to do it right. But one thing I will say, and I mean, I'm the first to smack around the MIAA for a lack of transparency and for not doing things correctly. I disagree with you only to this point. I thought that the meeting that was held, I went to the one that was in Central Mass. It was held at Algonquin, and that had the presentation done by Johanna DiCarlo, who's the AD at Westboro and is also the Central Mass rep to the Tournament Management Committee, was a really insightful meeting. You know, she did a great job of explaining what they had done, where their thought process was. Are they as far along as we'd like to see them? No, but I thought there was enough information presented in order to vote. But here was the thing that stuck out to me. There were 3 members of the media in the room. 2 of us were married to each other. That left Jim Clark as the lone person who wasn't married to Kate or I that were in the room. And there was a handful of coaches. And certainly not every school in Central Mass was represented. ADs were not in the room other than the AD who was presenting. And you know, when I kind of poked around and asked about that, the answer I got was, well, the ADs are aware. We've been talking about it for months. They know what the concept is. Well, okay. But this meeting seemed really important and seemed like the kind of thing that anybody who was going to cast a vote should have been present at in order to hear and ask their questions and to make it the transparent process that you're pointing to. If that meeting had more than 12 people at it, you may have felt like maybe that it was a thing that was well presented and did have a great packet that went with it. It's just, it felt like there wasn't this thing when they did hold meetings. The Western Mass one I thought was a little tight because that was right up against the vote. It was within a few days of when they actually held the vote at Aspect in February. And then the North-South meetings were held around the same time that meeting at Algonquin was. In each region had their own representative making the presentation. But I thought the Central Mass presentation was great. It explained it, it laid it out. You understood what you were voting for. There just weren't enough people there to understand it.
I think it would have been better, and I know that there were. I remember the Western Mass meeting because I was following Meredith Perry of Mass Live and her rundown of what was going on. I didn't even know that there was a Central Mass meeting, Todd. Could they have had it at, say, Fitchburg High? Could they have had one or a separate one for the North County? You know, that is a long drive from the North County to the Gonk. Have you made it lately, Todd? I think you have. I think I saw you in October in Leominster in November. That's a long drive from Fitchburg and Leominster with traffic, by the way, and against traffic too. Oh, and that's another thing. So during the winter, what time are you going to leave Fitchburg and Leominster or wherever to get to the North Shore? Oh, on a Friday night? On those highways, those already congested highways of 95 and 93, are you kidding? You better leave at the moment school gets out, or you're never going to get there on time for a 7 o'clock game. No way.
It does double emphasize the need for planning in the scheduling. And I've said this to a number of coaches, that I've had this conversation with, and that is gone are the days where, Central Mass games in the midwatch for the regular season are going to begin at 4 o'clock. And then the tournament is going to begin, at 2:30 when most schools aren't getting out until 2:15. Those days had better be erased with this concept because if not, you're going to have schools that are traveling in and are going to be arriving before home schools have even released school in some ways. So they're going to have to take that into account. And for outdoor sports, whether it's sports late in the fall or, late in the spring or early in the spring to some degree, you're going to run into the need for lights. It's going to be a must-have. You're going to have to start games at 7 o'clock at night, which means you're going to need help with facilities. And that was where, from a concept standpoint, if I piece apart things that I think are going to need more understanding, one of the selling points of the statewide tournament was that you would only basically have a neutral site at the state level when you got to the Final Four in whatever the sport was, that you would go to some neutral site location. Otherwise, everything would be held at the highest remaining seed on that particular game. Sounds like a great idea. The ADs get to keep more of the money. There's, going to have to be probably, some kind of a pool, back to the MIAA, of course. But generally speaking, the idea is you get to keep more money in your local coffers. Okay, but I don't have lights. I got to host a softball game or a baseball game, and I've got to do it at a time that team, North Adams, Amesbury, or, Orleans can get up here in order to play the game in Leominster or Fitchburg. neither of which, if they're softball facilities that they traditionally play at, have lights, which means you've got to go get another facility. The only one, of the two schools, Leominster and Fitchburg, that could do it would be Doyle Field has lights. So their baseball team could host a 7 o'clock or later start time. Softball or baseball at Fitchburg and softball at Leominster couldn't do that. They would have to then go to get another facility that would have the access to lights.
And I don't recall a facility for softball in our neighborhood, Todd, that has lights. I know of a few baseball fields that do, Doyle being one of them, and Pincanavino Field. Am I wrong? Am I right? Deshoppe Field at North Middlesex, do they have lights? Yes or no?
No, I don't see it there. The softball, you could move to Fournier Field, which formerly was the home.
That's going way back. That's when I was in high school.
Yeah, that's going back to when I was in high school as well. So that's pushing us 20 some years, back to that time period. So it's a different time. Those fields are not what they were at that point in time, but they're getting some renovation. There's going to have to be something. And I think that concept, is one of those things where you have to consider, okay, well, Fitchburg State doesn't really help you out there. I mean, their field at Coolidge Park is very nice, but it's not, I don't believe, a lit field. The one that is their softball field, I don't know that one's lit. The couple of the outer ones are. That one I don't think are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, may or may not help you there. But again, what we're going through, we're rambling off a list of potential locations to host this game, which means you can't do that the week of the game or when the bracket comes out or when you get the upset and the 16 beats the 1 or whatever the case may be, that now they get to host a game or whatever the case may be. You need to know those. So I'm thinking part of this process has got to include your laying out, okay, here's all the sports you compete in. If your games were going to begin at 7 o'clock, what sites are you using? And they did say there would be standards for things like, a basketball, gym that, has to have a certain amount of, the ability to have, a crowd and a gate and all of those things. So they are planning on putting those things out. But I think for outdoor sports, things like lights can't be an ignored of part of that conversation. They're going to be necessary, certainly for fall sports. They're a must have. And so I got to imagine in the spring as well.
Yeah, because you know how much those fundraisers for Crocker Field and Doyle Field and Art Hurd and Johnny Young, these communities poured in a lot of money for football. And to be fair, you're playing these games at night for football on a Friday night where you're going to get a reasonable gate in a reasonable amount of money to pay for these lights and the usage during the season. If you're going to be doing this during the spring, you're going to have to charge a decent amount gate. Are they going to be, freestanding, or are they going to be rented? So you gotta take that into consideration as well. And again, we go back to that budget, that all important numbers, the bottom line. I don't see a lot of teams being able to pull that off. Marshall Park doesn't even have lights at Lunenburg. So yeah, I'm having difficulty reconciling that, especially with, if you're going to be pulling kids out of school for half the day, like you said, that home team isn't going to be out the door until 2:15, 2:05, whatever, and you're going to have a team there rested and ready to go after that long bus ride. They probably get there an hour before the first pitch or 2 hours before the first pitch. They're going to be lounging in the dugout, getting ready for you. What kind of home field advantage is that? So I still think there's a lot of things that need to be ironed out before this is really, really implemented.
And the year of study, we've already talked about at the top of this broadcast, may be a very different looking year than your average year, which could certainly make it awfully difficult to learn what the effects this particular framing might have a year down the road. So perhaps in a return to normalcy come 2021, 2022, when this is supposed to be implemented, you might not have had that year of study that you were hoping for in this coming school year of 2020, 2021. So there may be some of this learn on the fly. And that was part one of our conversation with Sean Sweeney, sports reporter, Sentinel Enterprise, owner, operator of the Bay State Soccer Sentinel. More coming up with Sean Sweeney later on this week on our next edition of Press Row, streaming right here on Rivalry Family Media on Facebook Live, Friday night at 7:30. We thank you so very much for being a part of this edition of Press Row. And until Friday night, for all of us here at Rivalry Family Media, we thank you so very much for being a part of our family. On behalf of everyone, I am Todd Robbins saying so long, everybody.